Afternoon. This is Transportation Committee Chair Deb Barber. It is Monday, August 9th, 2021. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. Due to the ongoing pandemic, Council has determined that it is not reasonable or prudent to conduct in-person meetings at this time. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Becky, can you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings. Ferguson. Fredson. Gonzalez.
Here.
Sterner.
Here.
Zirin.
Present.
Barber. Chair Barber, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. We should be so out of or better practice at that. With that, seeing a quorum present, we'll call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Transportation Committee meeting for August 9th, 2021. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. Did anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? All right, seeing and hearing none, we can move on to approval of the minutes, and it's the minutes from the July 26th, 2021 meeting. Did anyone have changes or additions? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from July 26, 2021.
This is Sterner. I'd motion to make to approve the agenda
It's moved by Sterner. Is there a second?
or the minutes, excuse me.
Yep.
Zirin will second that.
Seconded by Zarin. Is there any other discussion? Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings. Ferguson. Fredson. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is the TAAC report. We have David Finley here tonight. Welcome, David.
Good afternoon, Chair Barber and council members. Thank you for having me yet again. I'm here to give you an update on the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting that we had on Wednesday, and just give you a couple more updates about what we are working on. We had two ongoing updates on Wednesday. Two things that we've been providing feedback on pretty regularly. The first one being the Metropolitan Council's ADA transition plan. It's cruising along. There's a lot of great things have been assessed and are going into the plan, and we're happy the way that Guthrie is running that. We also had an update on the Better Bus Stops 5-year work program and regular bus stop design guide. Bus stops tend to be something that we talk a lot about in TAAC meetings. A lot of the times in winter with snow removal, but this time is with bus stop design. So there was a lot of great discussion on bus stop design and location as well. We did get we had our first department, I guess, introduction, if you want to call it that. Transit-oriented development introduced themselves to us, and there was actually a more robust discussion than I thought was going to happen. I figured it would be just to tell us what you're about, but it turned out to be a good discussion, and we do look forward to getting more department introductions from folks who might not typically interact with TAAC, but we feel that this could be mutually beneficial to the departments throughout the Metropolitan Council and also our committee. So actually, a quick ask. You don't have to answer now, but if any of you have thoughts on departments that maybe wouldn't normally interact with us, but we should develop a relationship with, please, you can pass that information on to me. We currently have 2 work groups One in full swing and probably going to put out some cool promo materials here in the next month or two. The bus priority seating work group. And the second one, which is just getting started. We had to retool a little bit after our first meeting, but it is the marketing and transit info accessibility work group, where we're working with that department to go over the way with which the Metropolitan Council communicates on buses and trains, to see if we can find ways to make that more accessible. That is everything that I have. Quick and dirty. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David. Any questions from council members? Well, I will say thanks for the report, and definitely we'll reach out and think of other groups that could come and meet with you guys. I think one might be a good one would be some of our procurement group. We have been having a lot of conversations in that area lately, and I think that would be a really beneficial conversation, I think, to have. But yeah, I would love to hear from other council members if you want to send it to me or to David, and we'll try and get some of those sessions set up, because we definitely appreciate your group's input.
And if you want to see.
Thank you, Chair Barber and council members.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other questions right now, we'll move on to our MTS report, and we have Deputy Director or Acting Director Amy Venowitz here to present.
Madam Chair, may I interrupt for a moment? This is Molly Cummings, and I just
Oh.
want to let you know that I'm here now.
Welcome, Molly. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple METMO related items today. So our healthcare worker transportation on Metro Mobility will be ending next Friday on August 20th. We think we've noticed people adequately and don't foresee any problems with that. Also, our ridership is continuing to increase on Metro Mobility. And at the moment, we don't have capacity concerns, but we could see that potentially coming in the future. And so terminating the healthcare worker program is really coming at a pretty good time for METMO overall. Also related to, you've been hearing a lot about driver shortages with Microtransit. Metro Mobility is not having quite the same issue with our drivers, but we are also short on drivers. And again, as we head towards full capacity, it could potentially become an issue for Metro Mobility. We are coordinating with Microtransit in their employment fairs. And oftentimes drivers are confused whether they're applying for Metro Mobility or Microtransit. And so that coordination across our programs, we hope if we have drivers that are just a better fit for Microtransit will be directing them over to our programs. And at this time, we don't think the driver shortage will be quite a big issue for us, but we will keep monitoring that as we move forward. So that is all I have to report to you today, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Amy. Are there questions from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, we can move on to Microtransit General Manager Kooistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to keep mine really short because we're going to be reporting a lot later in the committee agenda on the Better Stronger initiative and the budget. So I'll just mention the patterns we're seeing on COVID infections in our workforce. And you'll recall that in June we had 2 for the entire month. In July we had 14. In the first 8 days of August, we've had 8. So we're seeing a significant rise at Microtransit, and this is sort of aligned with what we're seeing as a state, which has been the pattern all the way through. So with that, I'll end my comments.
Thank you very much, Wes. Are there questions from council members? All right, now we're on to business items. Then there are no items on consent tonight. So our first item is business number 2021-173, a same week item. It's the Metro B Line Award Design and Construction Administration Services contract. And we have Luke Sandstrom here, I believe.
Chair Barber and council members, before we dive into this item, I'd like to just first introduce Luke Sandstrom to the committee. Luke is a principal engineer and joined the Arterial BRT team back in February. So it's 6 months and 1 day that he's been with us as of today. And before joining Microtransit, he was the assistant city engineer for the city of Roseville. He's also worked for West St. Paul, as well as Dakota and Washington counties. So he comes with a great understanding of what it takes to fit our projects into urban corridors and the needs of our partners. So we're really excited to have Luke on the team, advancing engineering on the B line. And with that, I'll hand things over to Luke to present today's item.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. The proposed same week action item before the committee today is business item number 2021-173, which is to award and execute contract 20P322 with Kenilworth Associates for design, engineering, and construction administration for the Metro B-Line project in the amount not to exceed $9,785,510. The B-Line will upgrade and substantially replace Route 21, Metrotransit's second highest ridership bus route that runs along Lake Street, Marshall Avenue, and Selby Avenue. The scope outlined in this contract provides engineering and construction support by the consultant throughout the entire project, from preliminary design through construction closeout for the 33 planned stations and supporting infrastructure along the 13-mile project corridor. The entire B-Line project is fully funded through a combination of federal, state, and Metrotransit funding sources. Following the award and execution of the contract, project design and engineering will begin this fall and continue up through final design, which will conclude in Q4 of 2022. Construction is anticipated to begin in spring of 2023, with project completion and opening of the B-Line for revenue service in 2024. A request for proposals was issued on March 24th, 2021, and a pre-proposal meeting was hosted by council staff on April 5th. There were 21 registered plan holders, 18 of which were prime consultants, 1 subcontractor, two plan rooms, and 8 of the plan holders identified as a minority, woman, small, or disadvantaged business enterprise. The council received 3 proposals for this project. In accordance with the Brooks Act procurement process, the evaluation panel ranked and selected the most technically qualified proposer. In a Brooks Act procurement, cost is not included as an evaluation factor. Following approval of the evaluation panel's findings, conclusions, and recommendation, the negotiation panel opened the price proposal and conducted negotiations. The negotiation panel negotiated pricing and agreed that the final prices are fair and reasonable. The Office of Equal Opportunity set a disadvantaged business enterprise goal of 16% for this contract. The Office of Equal Opportunity has determined that Kenilworth Associates has met the DBE requirements of this contract. Kenilworth's DBE commitment in this contract is 17%. Therefore, Chair, the action for the committee today is to authorize the Regional Administrator to award and execute contract 20P322 with Kenilworth Associates for design, engineering, and construction administration for the Metro B-Line project in the amount not to exceed $9,785,510. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair Barber. I would like to ask Luke or someone else to explain the significance of the Brooks Act procurement process and why it does not have cost as a factor.
Thank you, Chair, committee member. So the Brooks Act procurement process is a requirement of federal funds. And so in order to comply with the federal rules for using funds, cost cannot be a factor as you are looking to bring a consultant on board. That is part of the negotiation factor after you choose a consultant, but the evaluation factors is a qualification-based evaluation, not a cost-based.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from council members?
Chair Barber, just one quick comment.
Go ahead, Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you. Just as we think about these evaluation criteria, I'd like us to see equity as part of the evaluation criteria. So that's separate from having a DBE goal. So for example, some firms are do a better job of evaluating the equity impacts in communities, or have, a value more equity, from a firm perspective, right? They hire more equitably, they manage their firm in different ways. So I think thinking about how we could have that as part of that evaluation criteria would be something that we should be including in the criteria. Not necessarily saying that to look to change this one, but as we go forward, when we have these opportunities to not simply buy on lowest price, how firms manage equity within their firm, I think, is an important part. So, for example, if we had, a firm that was, well, I just said, if, I think it's just something that we should ask firms about, how they hire, how they promote people, who the people that'll be working on the project are. And if we're, for example, we're doing a green line project again, and we're moving through or we're looking at the blue line eventually again, we're moving through neighborhoods where there's, a lot of people of color, having an all white project team might not be that might be something we might want to think about as we're thinking about evaluating consultants, and not just purely technical capabilities, but viewing equity as part of that technical skill set.
I will say, I don't know the answer to this, but I don't know how something like that ties to the Brooks Act piece of it, where a large part of it is focused on the technical capabilities. I don't know that there's a yes or no. I don't know what the answer is. So maybe it's something we could just look into in the future.
Yeah, it's just a question of whether or not equity matters in your technical skill set, right? I think that's really the question. I know in other contracts, people have found ways to include equity in the evaluation process. And it's a broad view of equity, right? It's not just necessarily racial equity, but, managing people with disabilities, and how transit corridors will impact, their lives, and just a broad view of equity and how our projects will impact that. So.
And I see Jody's on the line, so it's something that we can look into, especially as we look at projects going in the future, and find out kind of what the parameters are and what we can influence. I think that's fine. Anyone else have any other comments? Oh, yep, Jody's commented yes that she's already looking into it. So, all right. Any other questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-173, same week.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Ferguson. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson, Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Katie and Luke. Next, we're on to business item 2021-187, which is a joint same week item. It's the 2021 Southwest LRT budget amendment, and we have Ed Petrie here.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee members. Ed Petrie, Metrotransit Finance. I'm here to present 2021-187. It is the 2021 Southwest LRT budget amendment. And also with me this evening would be Jim Alexander if there's any additional project questions. The amendment this evening basically follows two items that have transpired prior to the amendment this evening. First of all, Mr. Alexander brought forward to the Transportation Committee back on July 26th a business item to execute a 7th amendment to the capital grant agreement with Hennepin County for $200,315,255. Following that, then the Hennepin County Board acted on Board Action Item 09-0220. They acted last Tuesday on August 3rd, and they approved it to add $200,315,215 to the Southwest project. So with those two items, I'm now bringing forward then the item this evening, the 2021 Southwest LRT budget amendment. This amendment will add Hennepin County funds in the amount of $200 million $315,255. This is based upon the Hennepin County Board Action 09-0222 and per the FTA requirement for the project to secure a commitment for these funds prior to the FFGA award. So with that, Madam Chair, committee members, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ed. Are there any questions from council members?
Councilmember Zarin here.
Councilmember Zarin?
Well, I think if Hennepin County wants us to have the money, we should spend it. So I move the motion, I make the motion.
Moved by Zarin. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion?
Sure, Barbara,
Seeing
just,
any-
sorry,
Go ahead.
question.
Go ahead. Yep, no
Um,
problem, Councilmember Ferguson.
If we go beyond this money, where does the, where does the rest of the money come? And do we have any concerns that we will spend more than the money that has been allocated by the local partners and by the federal government?
Madam Chair, maybe I could
Go ahead.
answer that. Jim Alexander, Project Director. Yeah, it's a very good question. Council member, is something on our minds. I just say that that we are in close partnership with the county as well as the Federal Transit Administration on funding for this project, and we will continue to be. If we should go over that that 10% that is going to be added with Mr. Petrie's item, then we'll have to have those conversations. It's something we are monitoring very closely, and as I'll indicate with my presentation on the next business item, we still have some items to tackle on this project, and mainly of the rescheduling of both the systems and the civil contracts. And so something we have to monitor very closely, and we'll keep you up to date as we understand more.
And you'll let us know when we're approving something that isn't fully funded?
Madam Chair, I would just say that we will have to bring something, if we bring something to you to approve, we'll have to have the funding in place that goes beyond that previously authorized amount.
Thank you.
Great. Any additional questions, comments? All right, seeing and hearing none, entertain a motion to approve 2021. Oh, we already did that. So so Becky, can you call the roll?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson, Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
All right, next we're on to business item number 2021-210 with this Southwest LRT civil construction change order for the Secant well, and Jim Alexander. Welcome again.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Greg, could you pull up the PowerPoint? Thank you. Okay, so before we get into the business item, I'd like to just kind of refresh you with some information that we had shared earlier this year, and effectively as recent as June, and give you an update on where we are with those two key issues that I've spoken about. Maybe Greg, you could advance to the next slide there. So we've been talking about a couple of issues in the Minneapolis area, the eastern segment of the project, and primarily around this corridor protection wall and the Secant wall. And we have a change order in place for the corridor protection wall, and that work is underway. We have contractors going great efforts get those get the drilled shafts in place, and they're starting to look to put in some wall panels here shortly. But what I want to talk about tonight is the Secant wall, and just recall that this item came about due to unforeseen soil conditions in the Kenilworth corridor. And we had observed some settling as the contractor was installing the sheet piles, which was originally programmed for the supportive excavation to build the tunnel. And so we knew that we had to go to an alternative construction method, really out of an abundance of caution, as we look to look at about a 500-foot segment of the half-mile tunnel when we're going by very close to some buildings. And so that's what this item is tonight. Maybe you could advance to the next slide there, Greg. So as I've indicated in the past, both these elements have had significant impact to the project overall, because they are integral to what the contractor is looking to build over the 14.5 miles that we have for the project. And so I'll continue to provide these next steps as we move through these issues. But as I indicated, the quarter protection wall is now under construction. And we're focusing on the Kenilworth tunnel at this moment, where we did have a business item earlier this summer talking about the grouting, and that work is looking to get underway. Hopefully later this month here. We're still working on the contractor getting them mowed out to the site. But what we're talking about tonight is 2021-10 is a secant wall, and I have some images that kind of refresh you what that looks like. But again, this is in place in lieu of the sheet piles for about a 500-foot segment along the Kenilworth tunnel. Now, coming up, we still have to address a sheet installation delay. We do know the contractor is looking for a change order to address the additional time it has taken to install the sheets. But essentially, most of the sheets are installed now. There's just we just need to do the secant pieces to get that finished up for this Ford excavation. But there was some delay involved just due to the issues that the contractor encountered, primarily with the unforeseen conditions of boulders and other materials in the ground. And then we also need to look at a resequencing of the tunnel construction. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to some of the images. But then upcoming beyond this, as I've indicated in the past, is that we have to look at the schedules for both the civil and systems, and also the SCADA contracts in terms of how that's going to look, because both of these issues, the quarter protection and the secant wall, have had a kind of a ripple effect, if you will, over the whole 14.5 miles that both contractors will be focusing on. So we will be coming before you with a change order request for those items as well. At this juncture, I don't have those determined yet. We're still working with the contractors and our consultants to determine what that schedule is going to be looking at. But I can tell you that we're having very productive conversations with our contractors on this piece, or on these pieces, and we anticipate bringing these to you hopefully in the near term. So next slide there, Greg. So business item 2021-2010 revolves around two elements. You may recall back when we did the quarter protection change order that we kind of took this two-step approach, where we looked to get approval from the Transportation Committee and the Council for the change order itself, because it's over $2.5 million, but also we were looking to increase the cumulative change order authority for the civil contract. That's contract 15P 307A. Next slide, please, Greg. So the change order is required due to unforeseen soil conditions that necessitates the alternative construction method for a segment of the tunnel. Again, it's about 500 feet in length that we need to do this. And it, again, it's out of an abundance of caution that we don't want to see any damage to the adjacent structures. So we've gone to this alternative method based on our site observations. And the increase in the cumulative change order authority is required for this item, as well as some other items that I brought forward to you earlier this summer, and some upcoming change orders that will take us over through the next several months. I would note that when we come back to you on the schedule change orders, when that gets established, we'll likely have to revisit this cumulative change order authority once we have those numbers better understood. Next slide, please. So this is the alignment in the Minneapolis area. You can see West Lake Street Station, and the two, actually the three lake bodies: Cedar Lake, Lake of the Isles, and Bedeh-Makaska. And in the darker colored is the kind of the reach of the tunnel, again about a half-mile long. And in the light blue is the area we're focusing on, is where the secant wall is required. Next slide, please. So in cross section, this is looking at the original plan on the left side and what we're proposing on the right side. And essentially we have sheet piles on both sides. And this is kind of thinking this is a supportive excavation to build the tunnel inside this cell, if you will. And what we're proposing to do, rather than the sheets on that one side, is in the dark red on the image on the right. You can see the secant wall, how that would be configured. And the next slide would show how that looks in a final condition. So essentially the tunnel itself does not change. We had to alter things a little bit for the design on the wall next to the secant in the right image, but essentially the tunnel is essentially pretty much the same as what we had before, but we have a secant wall in place rather than the sheets. Next slide, Greg. So I think I showed this image before. This is just a depiction of what that secant wall looks like. It's essentially a series of drilled holes, if you will, or shafts that get filled up with concrete. Every other one gets a steel beam gets placed inside it, and it's really a robust system that we feel will be adequate to protect the adjacent structures and also allow the contractor to build the tunnel. You might ask why we didn't have the secant in the original plan. Well, it's very expensive, as you can see by the change order amount, much more costly. We felt that the sheet piles were adequate based on the information we had at the time, but just due to the observations we saw as the sheets were getting put in, we saw that it requires a little more of a stout wall against as we run by those. There's a 10-story condominium building and about a 2.5-story parking structure we need to protect. Next slide, please. So these images are a little old. Off to the left is kind of give you kind of an idea of what this looks like. What you're seeing there is this is one of the cells that the contractor is building. They're about 100 foot in length as we go down the length of the tunnel. The struts are those members that are going across, and they're connected to whalers that run along the sheets, and you see the sheets on either side. And then off to the right, you can see essentially the bottom of the excavation as we had what's called a tremie seal. It's about 5 to 8 feet thick in this location. And there'll be eventually the tunnel structure will be built up from that area. So next slide, please. So in terms of the cumulative change order, we provided a table similar to this when we did the quarter protection change order item, that business item, but to give you the numbers here, the original contract amount, you see just under 800 million, and our current authorized cumulative change authority is sitting at 162 million, or 20.33%. Now, as we go into any contract, we have a 10% cumulative authority before we need to go to the council. So we had that originally, and with that business item associated with the quarter protection, we had that extended up to another 10.33%. So we're currently sitting at 20.3% of change order authority, and we have spent up to 156.7 million, or just under 20%. So we're just a little bit less than 1% of remaining authority. Thus, we need to increase that amount. So this is the second part of this business item, where we're looking for additional 75.9 million, or about 9.5%, to get us to 29.8% change order authority, or 238.5 million total. Next slide, please. So, Madam Chair, council members, the action tonight is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator through the Southwest Light Rail Transit Council authorized representative to negotiate and execute a change order for contract 15P 307A with London McCrossin Joint Venture in an amount not to exceed $29,979,444.69, and that the council authorize an additional 9.49% to the 20.33% cumulative cap of change order authority under Council Procedure 14-1A for contract 15P 307A. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's more first a comment. Mr. Alexander, I really appreciate the overview that you give us, and having sat on both sides of the table as an elected city official and now on the Met Council, the caution and the care that you take as this project unfolds is so important. And as you've said many times, and as we've discussed in this committee, and as the entire council has discussed, you cannot know what you're going. This is a fully functioning corridor. It's narrow, and there are so many things that are unanticipated, and the care with which you handle the issues as they come up, and then are straight with us and transparent with us and letting us know, this isn't the end. There are going to be additional things. It's just greatly appreciated. I think that it just reflects you and your team and the seriousness that you take in building this, and all of the various things that come along that you have to deal with that were not anticipated, and they're costly, and there's no question about that. But I always feel confident when you give us so much information that the project and the project office has done the best that they can to deal with the circumstances as they appear. And it certainly is a changing picture on a regular basis. So I just want to thank you for that. And then my question is simply that these two actions are combined in one, correct? So these are not separate actions, we're taking them as one.
Yes, Madam Chair, Council Member, that's correct. It'd be one item for the business item, but two pieces, I guess.
Okay. And I would be happy to move approval.
Thank you. Moved by Councilmember Cummings. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none. Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson, Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Jim. And all three of our items will go non-consent to council. The first two are same week items, and I think the change order should go to the full council if everyone agrees with that. All right, sounds good. All right, we're on to our information items for the night. We have a presentation from Microtransit on moving forward to a stronger and better transit system. We have Wes Kooistra, Adam Harrington, Nick Thompson, Brian Funk, Bruce Howard, and Nick Eull here. We were going to have Chief Frizell joining us here tonight. However, unfortunately, his mother passed away late last week. She was 80 years old and leaves behind many loved ones, including 3 grandchildren and 3 children and 10 grandchildren. So the chief will be with his family throughout the week. Please send on our sincere condolences and our thoughts and prayers to him and to his family from us. I much appreciate that. In his absence, we have Captain Brooke Blakey, who will be able to pinch hit throughout the presentation. So I think I'm starting tonight, probably kicking off with Wes.
That's correct, Madam Chair. Actually, Madam Chair, I'm going to be taking Chief Frizell's
Okay.
piece of the presentation. Thank you for those words. I really do appreciate it. We need to get the presentation up the screen. I'm not sure who's in charge of that.
Greg? All right.
Man behind the curtain, I guess. Yeah, we're seeing that's not coming up. No.
See, the joys of technology, just when we think we've got everything figured out.
That's looking positive.
There,
Perfect.
thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you much, Greg. All right. Madam Chair, I will start with some introductory comments, and as you know, the work of making our services better is a Metro Transit division-wide effort. So we do have a number of speakers here today, but I'll start again with some comments and an introduction to these efforts. As we emerge from the pandemic, we believe we have the opportunity to reintroduce ourselves to our customers and to the general public as a transit system that is committed to becoming stronger and better. Today, there are many factors that influence transit that we can't control: changing work schedules, parking availability and cost, congestion, and of course, the public's response to the pandemic. We plan and work in a transit environment that is really still dynamic, and we believe will be changing and dynamic for some time. I think the Delta variant is only the most recent example of that. So while we certainly are required to anticipate and adjust to changing circumstances, most importantly, we must retain our focus on what we really can control, and that's what has been our discussion at Metro Transit. And what we can control, we believe, most control, is the customer's experience when they ride. So rather than being distracted by the ebbs and flows of uncertain times, we view this as an opportunity to deliver a better service, and a service that better meets the priorities and expectations of our riders. What riders want and expect isn't surprising, and it isn't complicated, and it really hasn't changed much over time. Riders expect us to be dependable, to keep our promises and be there when we say we will. We've already proven that when services are fast, reliable, and easy to use, our ridership grows. Our riders expect our services to be safe and welcoming. And this is about providing adequate security, but is also about keeping our buses, trains, and public facilities clean and well kept. So the target of our planning and our work and our investments is meeting these expectations and improving what our customers experience. We want our customers to feel valued, and if that happens, we believe our ridership will grow. Transit is a public service. It's a service to individuals and communities. So to be successful, we need to be keenly aware of the voices of all community members, including those that choose to use our service and those who need our service. Advancing equity is at the center of what transit does. We are in the business of providing rides to opportunities, to work, to schools, to services, to friends and family. Later in this meeting, we will review our preliminary budget. As it should be, most of our operating spending can be tied directly to what is necessary to operate services on a day-to-day basis. These services are driven by the planning and scheduling of routes and trips. And throughout the pandemic, we've prioritized services for those who depend on us for their mobility needs. And as we plan to grow back our services, these service needs will continue to be our priority. So our ambition here is to focus and provide a stronger, better transit system, one that offers a great customer experience to everyone who uses our service, one that meaningfully addresses the mobility needs of those who require our service, one that grows ridership, and one that shows value and motivates our public investors to want to invest more. So with those introductory comments, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Harrington.
Thanks, Wes. Next slide. I'm Adam Harrington. I'm the Director of Service Development at Metro Transit. And as the General Manager said, we're here to build a stronger and better system. And we've learned a lot over this past year and a half. And all these elements the General Manager covered, you'll be hearing from each one of us about how we're working to make ourselves better and our system better in each one of those elements. Next slide. But we know for a fact, year after year, and this last year in particular, that reliable and fast service are really important. We know from our customer surveys, we know from hearing from our customers directly. We know from our experience in ridership on those services that we've improved speed and reliability on, whether it's light rail, bus rapid transit, or any of the number of speed and reliability initiatives we've taken on. But equally as important are the safety aspects of our service and the schedule information we provide that help it be easier for our customers to use and know when to go out and catch that bus or train. We've got $6.4 billion of capital projects programmed over the coming years ahead of us, and we'll hear more about that today. But I also want to harken back to our July 12th presentation to the Transportation Committee, where we talked a lot about how we know and how we track what our ridership patterns are, what our market looks like, and how we might be able to anticipate it. We've been talking a lot with our customers and with our business partners around the region to be able to understand that and help us move forward together. Next slide. So as we design a responsive network, these are 4 of our core elements from a service standpoint that we're continuing to advance. And the chart on the lower right of the screen represents our changing market. So we know from all the experience that we've had in the last year and a half that our ridership patterns have changed. We know that the regular commute pattern, which was a dominant part of our ridership over the past years, has changed significantly. But we also know that our customers who ride us day in and day out and use our service for multiple trip purposes continue to ride with us, and we hope to gain more of their support and ridership in the future. One way of doing that is to continue to build upon our core network, both in frequency and span, how often we provide that service, but making those improvements in speed and reliability. And then thinking a little bit more focused about how we provide our express service. It might not look like it did pre-pandemic, but we're really trying to provide that premium service on the primary corridors anchored on large parking rides. We'll be testing on-demand service and continuing to build on our Network Next program of BRT. Next slide.
I think she's one of the soccer coaches here.
And as we have over the past decades, we'll continue to look at our service planning through an equity lens. One of the things we talked about on July 12th is understanding where people live as one way of looking at how to plan a service, but also where they want to go. We have good information, both from customer surveys and also from the transportation behavior inventory, to help us understand where people want to go that may not be in their home area. Thinking back to the Orange Line Connecting Bus plan, there are a lot of improvements that we're making in Bloomington that may not show up as a residential location of where people of color or low-income people live, but it's the destination end of providing opportunity. So we're always looking at those travel patterns and how we can invest in the communities that we serve. This last year, we've just completed our annual service equity evaluation, which the general manager asked us to do, and really look at those metrics that we can continue to evaluate moving forward every year on how our service changes impact our communities and how we can learn from them and continue to refine our service. Next slide. Again, we're thinking about how we provide service to our customers. These 2 images should be familiar to this group. On the left is a map showing our service levels, representing the number of scheduled trips that are operated at any one bus stop in our system throughout the whole service area. You can see that they're focused in the core urban areas, and that's really a function of where we're trying to make our service reliable and fast and consistent for our customers. It's also illustrated on the chart on the right. So this is our pandemic chart of level of service that we had as of September 2020 and really moving forward. We continue to provide nearly 90 to 100% of our scheduled service on that local network, and we want to continue to build on that. But as of August 21st, just a couple weeks from now, we'll be improving our commuter express service in anticipation that over the course of the next several months, more people will be coming back to the office. Next slide. Harkening back to the speed and reliability aspects of our service, and you think about A line and C line, which are recently implemented, there are a number of tools in the toolbox to improve the speed and reliability and the overall customer experience for our customers. While we can apply all of those tools everywhere on all of our routes, there are a number of things that are strategic in a number of places. On the right are a couple of images. One, you can see the red paint from this aerial view of Hennepin Avenue, where we added bus-only lanes in the rush hour and have been very well received from our customers. And while right now it's not 24 hours a day, it provides great improvement to our reliability of service and an increase in speed for our customers who depend on us. On the lower right is a picture of a Route 63 bus. And we, in June, implemented improvements to bus stop spacing and speed and reliability improvements for our bus stop locations and our frequency of service and shelter improvements. and we'll continue to do that on a number of corridors. And I'll be talking a little bit about one of those improvements in the next slide. Better Bus Route 3. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is our Como, Maryland crosstown. It runs from downtown St. Paul through Como, Maryland, through the University of Minnesota into downtown Minneapolis. And as of August 21st, it will be extended to the 10th Avenue and Washington area, extending that high frequency service not just to the core of downtown, but through the North Loop, which has been experiencing significant growth in residential and retail activities over the past 5 years. We're really excited to provide that, and that will improve our high frequency network by adding a link that is designated as high frequency between downtown and Snelling Avenue. But the main point of this map is really to illustrate how we're providing commuter express service into the downtowns. Each one of the freeway corridors will now have express service into the downtowns, serving large park and rides where we can build upon that corridor as we move forward in time. We'd like to provide more service than we are in August 21st, but we do have some operator limitations that we've talked about. And as we move forward in partnership with our downtown businesses, thinking about what flexibility our customers may want in the future with remote work and hybrid work schedules, hoping to look at additional all-day service on those corridors that currently don't have it. Having said that, 35W South has all-day service, as does 394 to the west. So we're looking to make those improvements moving forward. So additionally, looking ahead, we'll continue to evaluate how we meet demand on local service as well as commuter express service. And those two pieces linked together are going to be key in how we evaluate performance moving forward into 2022 and looking at our plans for the future. Next slide. An innovative way to address mobility and improve neighborhood access is looking at an on-demand service. What we'll be piloting next year in 2022 is a pilot service for similar to Southwest Prime and an on-demand service that customers can reach using their mobile app on their phone. So we've been working carefully on developing the application and how that could integrate, making the connection from the neighborhood to things like Metro C Line or our local bus service. So we're excited about developing this new technology and thinking about how we can improve neighborhood access and really expand the connections that our customers currently have in our palette of services. Next slide. I'm going to introduce now Nick Thompson, who is our Deputy General Manager of Capital Programs, to talk more about building the network of the future.
Thanks, Adam. Next slide, please. So as we look out over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a major investment in expansion of our metro network, beginning with the opening of the expansion of the arterial BRT network. The D line, which is currently under construction, will open next December 22 is our current plan. And you see this as a marked accelerated expansion of our arterial BRT network. ABRT is really the heart of our transit vision for our region, and it's a critical part of our premium metro network of transitways. The pandemic has proven how important our ABRT is to our system. As you've seen in previous presentations about ridership in the pandemic, ABRT routes prove to be some of the most resilient aspect of our transit network, retaining the highest percentage of pre-COVID riders and regrowing the ridership at a faster pace compared to some of our other transit services. ABRT is also a key source of our future ridership growth in the region. When the A line and C line opened, they drove ridership 30% higher than the routes that they replaced. And we expect on the D line, B line, E line, F, G, and H, the same trends will occur. Well, we'll see a major ridership growth as these lines open up. The ABRT has been strongest among our services during the pandemic and as we grow out of the pandemic because it's really, as we mentioned in our July 12th presentation, it serves multiple types of trips. It's your work trip, your family trip, your school trip, shopping, event trip. It's all day reliable service. And that's a resilient service on our network because it meets so many different needs. And our policymakers and legislature and this federal funding is really seeing the benefit of ABRT, as recently state and federal funding has been fully committed to the funding of the B and E lines, and has made a significant investment already in the F line, and so it allowed us to begin development of that. These ABRT lines, you can think of them as connectors to prosperity too. The D line connects 120,000 residents to 200,000 jobs on that single D line. The B line will connect a population of over 100,000 to 130,000 different jobs along the B line. And 42% of this population that we're connecting is a BIPOC community. With this investment plan, ABRT is also expanding to areas that haven't had this all-day reliable service. 4 counties will have an ABRT system within them. 8 suburban communities will get their first ABRT investment. So this is a key expansion of our interconnected network with frequent, fast, and reliable services. Next slide, please. First up in our expansion of this, first to open, we'll be expanding our highway BRT, and as has been mentioned, our orange line is now on track to open this December, connecting Burnsville, Bloomington, Richfield, and Minneapolis along 35W. As Adam had mentioned too, when this service starts, we'll redesign the network within the map that you see on the right, and as we presented before you, to make those connections to the orange line so that all these communities have really good connections to this fast, reliable service. Like ABRT, Orange Line marks a significant upgrade in the customer experience for speed and reliability. It replaces Route 535 with significant travel time savings, major security upgrades, station amenities at each stop, and a new fleet of multi-door boarding buses. Orange Line also becomes a new option for reverse commuters. As we're building this metro network, we're connecting people out to the suburban job market also. Next slide, please. On the heels of opening Orange Line, we anticipate in next year to start construction of the Gold Line that will connect Woodbury to St. Paul along I-94. Orange Line, or the Gold Line, will be our dedicated BRT system, creating highly reliable transit in an area that is really mostly served, and a lot of it only by express service. So all-day service, connecting the suburban markets in Woodbury to downtown, but also, like Orange Line, a great new reverse market to the jobs and opportunities in Woodbury and Maplewood. Next slide, please. And of course, as evident by some of our business items today, we continue to build out our core LRT network. We anticipate within the next 5 years to complete the Green Line and begin on the new Blue Line extension. These 2 rail extensions will add to the core backbone of our metro system, with expectations that between them will carry over 50,000 riders per day. ABRT, Orange Line, Gold Line, Blue Line, and the Green Line extensions are major next phases of the metro system. When this full vision is built out in the next decade, it will connect 28% of our region's residents and 46% of the region's BIPOC residents to fast, frequent, high quality, all-day service. It is really an opportunity for prosperity for our residents. 44% of all our jobs will be on this metro system. It's a key to equity, access, and prosperity for our region's residents. So I'll turn it over now to Brian Funk to discuss some of the changes we're making in our fleet to make it a better and stronger system.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Funk. It's good to be with you again. I'm Acting Chief Operating Officer and happy to get us started out with a couple slides on what we're doing in the area of both buses and light rail vehicles. Next slide, please. All right, on the bus system, we're continuing our focus, as it notes here, on a clean and reliable fleet. We've continued our daily disinfecting since March of 2020. We believe that not only in the face of COVID, but in all aspects, this is a good business practice, and so we're going to be continuing that for the foreseeable future. Our 5 bus garages have met their reliability, what we call mean distance between failure goals, for the month of July, and as a system, we've met our goal each month since March, and so we're continuing to make that commitment, and our maintenance teams are doing a real bang-up job of ensuring that our buses are available, so we're able to deliver that service reliably day in and day out. As Nick mentioned, the BRT buses are a high-profile part of our investments for Orange Line and the ABRT network, and I'm happy to report that thanks to council approval and good work by staff, we're in great shape to have both our Orange Line fleet on site ahead of service starting later this year, and we're also well positioned for the next BRT line with D-Line. On the zero emissions front, our planning continues. We recently hosted a 3rd on-site demonstration from one of the battery electric bus manufacturers, which gives our staff, both in maintenance and transportation, the ability to really see, touch, feel what each of the manufacturers are doing with their latest equipment and vehicles. You know that the council recently approved the master contract. Work orders are being processed now to continue our transition planning efforts as we really meet our deadline from the legislature of February 2022, but also to set that milestone of when are we making our purchases, what are the types of vehicles that we're going to be looking to procure, and how does that fit in with all the principles that are going to be developed over the next coming months as we transition more and more of our buses away from diesel purchases. And finally, last month, we had announced a major success with a low, no emission grant for more than $4 million to acquire 8 additional battery electric buses that are the 40-foot variety, so that we're able to implement those successfully on local route service, aiming for early 2023 for those buses. Next slide, please. And on the light rail side, I also have some good news. I'm happy to announce that all but one light rail vehicle has had their new seats installed. And so that's been a process, and the maintenance team at Light Rail has also done a fantastic job. As the equipment has come in, they've made sure that they've dedicated the resources to get those installed. And so right now, LRV 263 is the lone one. We're just waiting on a few more parts, but we're still aiming and should have that wrapped up no problem this month. So very exciting news there. The digital cameras that the council approved a while back have been operational. Performance has been reliable. Our real-time information center, both from Transit Police as well as our Rail Control Center, has been able to make use of those live cameras to be able to respond to situations on board and quickly ascertain what's needed in an appropriate response when we do get a call for service from those vehicles. And we're working through a process for continuing that well ahead of putting the Southwest fleet into service as well. And finally, like the buses, we continue to focus on disinfecting our light rail vehicles every day. We've invested staffing resources to clean trains both at Target Field and Union Depot so that our vehicles are getting a fresh start for each trip. We believe that that's paying dividends. So these efforts are going to continue. And as the general manager stated early on, we're really working hard to focus on the items that we can control. And I'm really proud of the maintenance teams for delivering that quality product each and every day. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Nick.
Thanks, Brian. So the bus, next slide, please. There we go. So the bus stop is seen as our customer's entry into our transit system. And since 2014, we've really been putting a focus on making the bus stop a more welcoming and safe experience through our Better Bus Stops program. The goal of Better Bus Stops is to improve the infrastructure for the customer experience at the stop, improving by adding shelters and improving shelters, making pedestrian improvements at stops, increasing installations of heat at our shelters, and adding better traveler information. And then really expediting the replacement of a system of aging stops that were out there that needed to be replaced. So over the next 5 years, we're accelerating these investments in our Better Bus Stops program over what we had planned. We're going to invest over $6 million in bus stop improvements. This is both new and replacement of shelters adding more heaters and lights, and making more accessible boarding pads for our customers. This accelerated investment represents about 50% more than we had been investing in such improvements between 2014 and 2020. So a focus for our customers that we feel is very important over the next couple of years. Next slide, please. To be a welcoming point of entry to our transit system is just not the capital investment side, but it's really how we maintain that. So we are increasing our emphasis on making sure our shelters are clean. We've changing our design so that we can replace broken glass and remove graffiti at a faster pace, and so that there's less issues with the bus stops on any given day. And to do this, we need to add some of our staff, as I mentioned before. You know, as we build out that metro system of facilities and transitways, we also are adding a lot of public facilities that will need to be maintained. So we are gearing up for the expansion of that system by adding staff to not just our existing system, but to be ready to maintain and make sure that our new shelters, our new stations can be welcoming and safe places for our customers. Some of our focus areas is adding staff that will maintain our shelter heaters that we have throughout the system. For the past 3 years, a broken heater has been our number one source for customer complaints. And so making sure that we have enough staff to respond to our new systems, but really make sure that the heaters work and other systems work so that that customer has the same good quality experience every day when they go to meet the bus. So in the next slide, please. In addition to better bus stops, we've been having a focus recently on our major transit centers. Starting with the upgrades for the Mall of America station that were completed in 2019 and is our largest and most used transit center. We had a dramatic overhaul for the customer experience at the Mall of America. But we're expanding that to our other major centers. Our Brooklyn Center BCTC renovation is complete. We've made presentations before this committee before about the major investments there, not as for customers, for their safety, for their security, but also for our employees in our waiting areas there. The Sunray, St. Paul Sunray Transit Center also seeing major investments this year. And these are just examples of improvements to our transit centers, and we will be going through our capital planning process again this year, and we anticipate several other transit centers will receive investments to improve the customer experience and update and modernize these key components to our transit system. So with that, I will turn it over to Wes to talk about our safety investments.
Is anyone else not hearing Wes? Okay.
It's because
I'm not hearing
that's because I didn't have my microphone on. I'm going to
Okay.
confess that to the
There he is.
public. I was asking to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Great, thank you. My apologies. For this section of the presentation, as I mentioned, I'm pitch hitting for Chief Frizell. And again, I'm sorry that he cannot be with us today to present this item, and wish him the best. At the last committee of the whole, the Citizens League reported that there are many factors that influence the perceptions of safety, including presence, facility upkeep, lighting, communication, on-time performance, and more. All these influences are being addressed in other parts of this presentation. This part of our presentation really focuses on increasing presence. Our riders want a service that is responsibly regulated, one that feels welcoming and safe. And we've made several investments in security in recent years that we can build on. including real-time cameras to our rail cars. In addition to the cameras we have in other public facilities, creating a real-time information center where police officers and other staff can monitor live camera footage. More police officer time is now spent on our rail cars and not in our squad cars. And we doubled the staff to handle text for safety calls. We've also added resources to the homeless action team, and the homeless action team has connected more than 400 people to permanent housing who no longer need to use our trains for shelter. Still, we need to do more to make our customers feel welcome and safe. And in July, we announced investments of $4 million per year focusing on improved safety and customer service. These investments will visibly increase Metrotransit's presence on our trains, buses, and public facilities, and we will be adding 50 part-time community service officers who will be assigned to be located on our buses and trains. 10 police officers will be added to support the CSOs and respond to service calls, and staff are being added to our real-time information center to enhance our video monitoring capability. By June of next year, we hope to add more than 2,000 hours of presence monitoring and customer service and assistance each week. More eyes and ears will be on our transit service, and this means more assistance will be available to our riders. An increased official presence will make a difference. However, we know providing a safe, welcoming service is a continuous effort, especially as our communities face growing challenges. As crime grows in our communities, concerns about crime do grow on transit. As unsheltered homelessness increases in our communities, more people will use transit as shelter. And if our healthcare and social service systems fail to provide the treatment and care required by people with mental illness and chemical addiction, the gaps in our safety net become more visible on transit services. So we are making here our significant investments in this presence model that has proven to be effective in other cities and with other transit agencies. But we know that a comprehensive solution requires the support of many partners who work focuses on healthcare treatment, social services, housing, adolescent services, and criminal justice. And we continue to work towards building those necessary partnerships and encouraging their participation in the solution. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce Howard for the next slide.
Thanks, Wes, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Perhaps in no other area of today's presentation have customer expectations changed more in the last few years than with regard to customer information. So notwithstanding what the general manager talked about earlier, there are areas where expectations probably have not changed that much, but customer information is not one of them. If you think about it, here's some things that have changed. Our always-on culture, our 24/7 culture, means people want things immediately. Social media has redefined the definition of fast. Consumers demand personalized service almost everywhere they go, and customers expect a mobile-friendly experience almost everywhere they go, just to name a few. And so when it comes to building a stronger and better transit system with regard to customer information, we are not only going to be compared to yesterday's transit system, we're going to be compared to expectations from around the world that we live in. So if my teenage son and his friends can order, pay, and track delivery of their pizza on their phone, well, you know they certainly won't expect to break this habit when it comes to using transit. And so how are we going to prepare for that? Well, we're using a three-pronged approach to meet these rapidly changing expectations. And I'm going to briefly talk about each one of those. Number one, we're implementing new systems that take advantage of state-of-the-art technologies when it comes to improving accessibility to and the reliability of transit information. A couple of examples here. We just launched our new mobile app. So this newest version of the mobile app launched last month. Things went well. It positions us to do more with mobile tickets. It positions us to do more with alerts, with mobility integration and mode integration. Another example is our website. Instead of making periodic updates to the website every couple of years, we're now in a position to make continuous improvement to that website, using the staff that we have here and bringing a lot of that work in-house. And then finally, another example is we're expanding the use of social media. You may be aware that just last summer, we launched a new Twitter account. It's at MT_MN alerts that allows you to follow all of the rider alerts that we produce. So just a couple examples of how we're using state-of-the-art technology to make sure people have accessibility to our information. The second area I wanted to talk about was, and I'm sorry, Greg, if you could advance the slide there. And the second area I wanted to talk about was aggressively using data to provide riders with the most up-to-date and accurate information at each stage of their journey. So a couple examples here are our Next Trip, our real-time information system. We just received new software to make vehicle predictions more accurate. And we're working on digital screens and hardware upgrades, and you can see a couple of the pictures here, and expansion of those solutions using things like e-link displays so that our next trip information is more available in more places throughout the region. We're working to rethink and improve detour communications to riders. We know this is an important one. And so what we're doing is we're actually making improvements and enhancements to several of our existing planning, operations, and communication systems so riders have the most accurate and updated information through whichever channel they choose to use. So data is going to be one of those key areas that we focus on. And then finally, we're going to expand our Transit Information Center resources. So we already have a great Transit Information Center, and you can see one of our reps there in the picture. And we're going to continue to employ very knowledgeable transit staff to help educate riders who need or want that personal experience and to help them reduce those pain points as they go through the system. But we're also going to do it in new ways. For example, we're going to be able to add chat to our services. So in addition to phone, it's going to be chat and text to make it easier for riders to connect with our trained staff. And finally, we're looking at more tools like IRA. And I think we mentioned this at a meeting earlier this year. IRA is an app that uses the camera on a customer's phone to connect them to transit reps in real time. And we're going to use that and other accessible technologies that will allow blind and low vision customers, LEP customers, and those with cognitive disabilities to more effectively use the system in the years ahead. So that's a little bit about how we're making customer information stronger and better. And next, we want to talk about a couple upcoming promotions to rebuild ridership. And I'm going to introduce Nick Eull, who's our Senior Manager of Revenue Operations. Nick's going to talk about the next slide and our fare promotion, and I'll return to talk briefly about our fall marketing campaign. So Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Nick Eull. I'm the Senior Manager of Revenue Operations at Microtransit. And we know that over the next 4 months, Twin Cities residents will be making key decisions on returning to offices and classrooms throughout our region. We're going to make that choice to choose transit even easier and cheaper. First, in September and October, Metrotransit and regional providers will be providing $1 fares for all full fare riders and 50-cent fares for reduced riders, including TAP riders, for all regular route bus and bus rapid transit, light rail, and North Star. These fares will be good on all days at all times. These fares will be available for those paying with cash, stored value, or using Metrotransit's mobile ticketing app. Note that these fares don't include the special express service we provide to the state fair. Reduced fare riders, including senior and youth, limited mobility, and TAP riders, ride for only 50 cents during September and October, as I mentioned. Our region's TAP program is one of the most heavily discounted low-income programs in the country today, and this discount provides an even deeper discount for TAP users and offers even more incentive for eligible riders to sign up. One thing staff has been looking at for some time is what a fare simplification effort could look like throughout the region. Many transit agencies across the country have embraced fare simplification over the past 10 years, and there's strong interest in our region looking at this again. This fare discount could help us plan for a possible fare simplification effort in 2022 by providing key data on how customers might adjust their riding patterns if fares were simplified. In addition to $1.50 fares, we'll also be discounting the 6-hour pass, which is primarily used for events, to $2 for the month of September and October. We recognize that students and employees will be coming back at different times during the fall, so we're also discounting key program passes for students and regular commuters to encourage them to use transit when they do choose to return to the office or head back to the classroom. For the months of September through December, students participating in our Student Pass program, College Pass, and UPass can purchase a pass for half off for the fall semester. In addition, Metro Pass, normally $83 a month, will be just $41.50 for riders participating in the program from September through December. We know things are shifting quickly here in the Twin Cities and in other places as business and schools finalize and adjust their return to office or return to classroom plans. With that, we do know that there are students who will be returning to school starting next month and throughout the fall, and that over the next 4 months, many companies will start or continue bringing their workers back into the office. And we know that there are many folks, essential workers, many of them, who have and will continue to use Metro Transit no matter what. These fare and program discounts put Metro Transit in great position to demonstrate our value to current and new riders in the months ahead. Together with our regional partners, we're thrilled to offer these discounted and simplified fares to our customers this fall. And as always, we'll continue to work with our customers and business partners to adjust as best we can to make transit the preferred transportation option for everyone. And now I'll hand it back over to Bruce, who's going to talk about our marketing campaign.
Next slide, Greg. Actually, Nick, I don't know, here's a recap of Nick's fair promotion here on this slide. So I don't know if you want to mention anything else on this, Nick, that you didn't already cover or not before I move on.
No, I think I covered it all, Bruce. Thanks, though.
All righty. Very good. Next slide, Greg. Okay. So in this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about our 3 phases of our overall marketing approach that we've been following this year. Based on changes in the pandemic, CDC and Minnesota Department of Health guidelines, we've kind of put together this 3-phased approach for our marketing efforts. And on the right-hand side of the slide here, you'll see phase 1 began in April and May. At that point, we were mostly messages about continuing to travel responsibly, but we were able to raise our capacity limits during this time period on buses and trains, and we began to condition the market for a broader return to transit. And so now we're into phase 2 here in June through August, and we've been using the marketing message and creative you see in the upper left-hand side of this slide. Here when you're ready. In this phase, we anticipated more travel as more jobs returned, in-person events start up again, and businesses fully open. Capacity limits on our buses and trains were eliminated, and we began to add back some service. Not the pandemic levels, but at least we took a small step in the right direction. And really, ridership has responded here over these past several months. We went from averaging around 81,000 weekday rides in January to around 97,000 weekday rides in July. A long way, of course, from our pre-pandemic level of about 260,000 weekday rides, but it's exciting to see people returning to transit again. And so now we're going to move hopefully into phase 3 here as we move into September and throughout the rest of the year. And you can see an example of our phase 3 marketing creative in the lower left-hand part of this slide here. The creative is an invitation to come ride with us, going to be directed at any lapsed riders and potential new riders. And we're also going to promote our website. As you can see there, this is an example of a bus side. You don't see the whole bus, but that's what the bus side looks like. So Bus Buddies Reunited is the theme of this particular creative execution. And you can see we also have on there metrotransit.org/forward website. That's where we are going to share a lot of the information that we've been sharing here with you as we go forward and move on to create a stronger and better transit system. And finally, I will note we'll be tagging a number of these executions of this campaign, like this bus side here, with what we call a snipe. It's a special sticker there, and you can see in red there, ride for $1 in September and October. That's the fare promotion Nick just talked about. So the fare promotion will have its own communications that'll be kicking off in September and flow through October. And this will be a longer term marketing campaign that we hope to put into the marketplace from September through December. And so with that, I believe I turn it back over to Adam.
Great, thanks, Bruce. It's a really exciting prospect to think about bringing all these pieces together, and hopefully you'll see that all these aspects work together to help provide a strong service for our customers, and thinking about how we can create a good customer experience and continue to grow and listen to them and watch the performance of our market and really watch, frankly, what's going on with COVID and the Delta variant, and staying in contact with our stakeholders to understand how they're moving and how we can respond and work together. So as we move forward into 2022 and beyond, we'll continue to monitor our service performance to that end. We'll be reviewing our service express service market as well, in particular because it's frankly the most volatile, as Eric Lynn said on our July 12th presentation. When you have a investment just in one area, that's a higher risk area, and we want to continue to build on our core local service and all those new investments that we're planning for the future to provide strength to our network and really grow those multi-purpose, multi-trip purpose rides and services. We'll be evaluating the overall fare structure in 2022 and looking at how we can simplify our fare structure. It is one of the more complicated structures in the country, and so we'll be taking a fresh look at how we can make that simpler to use and more equitable to apply. And of course, we will continue to use an equity lens in all the things that we do, and we'll also be pulling together our annual service equity evaluation as part of our work. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to General Manager Wes Kooistra. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. As I mentioned in the intro, that becoming a stronger, better transit system by improving the customer experience should not only drive what we do, but drive our investments. And so I'm using this also as a transition to the budget presentation, the next item on the agenda. And in that preliminary budget, it is still a work in progress, probably more so this year than any other year. Again, this is because we are planning and working in a transitioning environment. The external influences on our future are still uncertain, and we have been recently reminded about how quickly the narrative can change. To be completely honest, sometimes it seems we have more questions than answers, and we must make assumptions about ridership and fare revenues, but these are based on changes in travel habits still undetermined. Today, we're still planning to return to 95% service levels in 2022. But in the end, travel demand will influence this outcome, as will our success in hiring operators in what is a very difficult job market for transportation. So more than with any other past budget, this budget will receive further development between now and October. Now in the October public hearing draft, and there of course will be more changes between the public hearing draft and the final budget to be adopted December, as there's an intervening forecast in that time period. But as we develop this budget, we look at how we can invest to build a stronger and better transit system. So again, this is about investing to improve the customer service and addressing what the customers need and expect from us. With the preliminary 2022 budget, we are increasing our presence on transit to improve safety and to address our other customer needs. We're adding resources that will improve the upkeep of our existing facilities and bus stops. We are planning to bring more strategic and forward-thinking approaches to workforce development and to advance equity through our services and within our organization. We will continue to prioritize and protect our core local routes as we add back service, as we've mentioned, and the 2022 budget will include a full year of Orange Line services and the start of Metro D Line services planned to begin late in 2022. We are committing to technology that will improve how we communicate with our customers, including those with limited English proficiency and customers who are blind with low vision. This is assuming that our current pilot is successful. We are adding funding that will increase our public engagement partnerships with community-based organizations, and we are investing in positions that will focus their time on improving our MCUB contracting performance across a very large, complex transit organization. And we will continue to increase our investments in the Transit Assistance Program, better bus stops, the homeless action team specifically for contracting with mental health professionals, and with the North Minneapolis Microtransit pilot that's already being discussed. So the moving forward, better and stronger presentation that we just provided is in many ways an introduction to the preliminary budget presentation. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the agenda time. And when you are ready, we can move to the preliminary transportation budget presentation.
Perfect. Thank you all for your presentation. It was really informative. Are there any questions or comments from council members? No, but definitely thanks again. That was really, really helpful presentation, Wes and team. All right, so then we'll shift over to the discussing of the preliminary budget. We have Heather Augustin-Heber and Ed Petrie here.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance with Metro Transit. And I have with me Heather Augustin-Heber, Director of Finance for Metropolitan Transportation Services. We'll wait for Greg to bring the presentation up. There it is. Great. Thank you, Greg. We have about a 38-slide presentation here this evening. We've cut it down 10 slides from last year, but Heather and I will try to be as efficient as we can to go through this presentation. Next slide. First of all, with the overall schedule, we're in the July-August timeline where we're going to be identifying what the preliminary budget is for review with all of our information items. These items will then be included with what goes to the council now on Wednesday night on August 11th. We'll come back then to the council on August 25th, where you'll be adopting the preliminary operating budgets and maximum tax levies. Our budgets, so within transportation, do not impact the tax levy. So as Wes mentioned, there will be changes between what we're presenting today with the public hearing document and final adoption as we continue to evolve out of the pandemic. In addition, September and October, you will see Heather and I, we're going to come back to the Transportation Committee and Council and present the capital budgets. In the month of October, it goes out for public comment. And then on the December 8th meeting, the council will be adopting both the final budget, operating capital, and the levies. Next slide. So as we talked about last year, there's basically three bases for the budget development. We first of all have the Minnesota statutes for the regional administrator. We have council policies and actions, and also then the legislation and legislature and our financial outlooks that we use. So next slide. So first off, the basis for the budget development is under Minnesota Statute 473.125 under Regional Administrator. I'll just read it. It says the Regional Administrator shall recommend to the Council for adoption measures deemed necessary for efficient administrative of the Council, keep the Council fully apprised of the financial condition of the Council, and prepare and submit an annual budget to the Council for approval. So that is a process that we are marching through right now. Next slide. So first of all, there's a number of actions that the council has taken over the years, and they continue to revise as we move forward, which include some bases for our budget development. First of all, the council adopts the transportation policy plan, and which basically sets the standards for all regional transit service in the region. This includes both regional service, including the council and suburban transit providers. Per this evaluation, as routes are being evaluated, routes not meeting the transportation policy plan standards are reviewed for potential changes, including elimination, where we use the term continually called harvest and reinvest. And then also in addition, we also do an annual route analysis that's performed on an annualized basis to annualize route performance. In addition to that, the council has labor agreements with both ATU, TMSA, police, ASME, non-rep, etc. These labor agreements and also their respective wages are part of the wage parameters that we use for our budget development. As we talked about earlier, Bruce and Nick talked about earlier about fare policy. The council does set the standards for fare policy, and that's one of the things that we'll also be looking at with our fares, potentially for fare simplification in 2022. Target fund balance, the council does have a target fund balance policy, which does promote responsible financial management. The council does have target fund balances for each one of the individual units, business units, and we do have a slide and a couple slides back that will actually give you more detail on where fund balances stand moving into the 2021-2022 budgets. The final item that we'll have some detail on in a couple slides is the federal relief funds. As you are aware, the council was fortunate to be the recipient of 3 different lettings of federal funds totaling $725.8 million. And we will be using this funding. We used some in 2020, 2021. We plan to use some in the 2022 budgets. And with this funding, it'll hopefully carry us through with our financial forecasting to about mid-year 2025. So we were very pleased and very happy to be recipients of 3 different lettings of federal funds. Next slide. Okay, now forecasts and legislation. This is the next piece. We just want to point out that our preliminary budgets they've been reviewed with all the forecasts and financial plans. I think you're aware that the council does, the Council Finance Transportation Group. We actually do multi-year financial forecasts. We actually look out for the current year and forward the next 2 bienniums and forecast our financial results so we can plan and adjust transportation and or bring recommendations to the council as necessary so we can still maintain a balanced system. One of the things that's been very important over the last few years is, in fact, last year with the legislation and with the legislature, they appropriated a separate line for Metro Mobility, made it its own line. And now this year within the legislature, Metro Mobility became its own forecasted program in state fiscal year 2026. We think the council feels, first of all, we feel this is has been very important because we feel that the legislature recognizes that the financial growth of Metro Mobility is real. It's very expensive, but they also recognize that it's a federally mandated ADA service that they are there to support. And Heather will have some additional detail on Metro Mobility as we move forward. One of the things I do want to point out, though, is we still do have a structural deficit on bus operations and rail operations in the future biennium. And as we talked about right now, with our current forecasts, with the use of reserves, the federal funds, we think we have enough funding with our motor vehicle sales tax forecasting and what we think will happen with the return of ridership to get us through about mid-year 2025. So that's our structural deficit moving forward. We're very happy that we did receive the federal funds to give us that break. Financial considerations, though, like we talked about, we include what's included with the state general fund appropriations, motor vehicle sales tax. We've included federal relief funds, and we do our 5-year financial outlooks. Next slide. So talking about state general fund appropriations, once again, these are funds that are appropriated by the legislature on a biennial basis. Existing legislation states that it must cover 50% of the net operating assistance for light rail, but does not include the Southwest extension. That is one item that was removed per legislation. State general fund appropriations are funded right now through Metro Mobility, light rail, and commuter rail operations. There is no funding or use of state general fund for bus operations. Bus operations is reliant upon 100% by motor vehicle sales tax. One of the challenges or risks that we will have moving forward is with rail operations, we're going to, as you'll see in a future slide, the state general fund appropriations for rail and commuter rail operations is flat for the next 4 years. So one of the things the legislature does not recognize inflation. So that's one of the things that we will have to go back to the legislature and ask for an increase in state general fund appropriations to keep up with inflation. Next slide. So this is just a pictorial quickly of the state general fund appropriations. You can see basically Metro Mobility has a base appropriation of about $56 million through year 2025. As I said, then in state fiscal year 26, then it becomes a forecasted program, which is a very positive. Light rail, commuter rail operations, you can see they are flat at 25.5 million and just over 7 million for commuter rail operations. The challenge and the risk that we have here is that the fact is those lines are not going to keep up with inflation. As inflation grows, as you are aware, we generally assume inflation at about 3.15% a year. The funding from the state for light rail, commuter rail is not increasing. It has 0% base. We also did receive some one-time general fund appropriations in 2022. We have a zero emission plan that was mentioned during the previous presentation that we had to file with the legislature by February 2022. Adam and his group will be working with MnDOT, I believe, on a Highway 55 study. And then we are also the recipient. We were very happy to receive $57.5 million of state appropriations for the BRT lines, which we recommended to the council, $40 million going to E and $17.5 million going to F. I presented that with a budget amendment on July 26th. That will now go to the council for recommendation and approval on the 11th, on Wednesday. Next slide. Motor vehicle sales tax, which is the big workhorse for the transportation division with the bus operations. If you recall, we do get a forecast with motor vehicle sales tax twice a year, February and November. Anything beyond that, beyond the state's forecast, we generally will use whatever MnDOT is recommending to forecast our future years going forward. One of the things I do want to point out, the recommended budget this evening is based upon the February forecast. As Wes mentioned, there will be changes between the public hearing document and council adoption in December. One of the changes will be the November forecast. We will receive a revised forecast for motor vehicle sales tax by the state in November. We will then adjust that before final adoption in December. As we've discussed previously, the council does budget for a conservative measure. We budget 95% of motor vehicle sales tax. Any receipts above the 95% are used in the following year, in the following year's budget. But as we talked about also, it's a volatile revenue source. It follows the state of the economy. If the economy is strong, people are buying vehicles, strong motor vehicle sales tax. If the economy starts going soft, one of the first contractions that people actually look at doing is they have to keep their households going, but they will stop buying motor vehicles, which reduces down our taxes. And then one of the things that we've talked about historically is that we do need a future dedicated and stable source of revenues for our bus systems.
Ed, I have a quick question. As
Absolutely.
far as MVest, do we have any concerns with just the shortage in the availability of cars right now? Because there was a supply chain issue. I don't know really what the status was, but that had been a problem over the last few months.
Chair, committee members, great question. That's one of the things I do want to point out with motor vehicle sales tax, because it's such a volatile source. We actually watch receipts every single month. We compare it to what the original state forecast was. Receipts right now are holding, but we're also very cognizant of the issue that you're talking about. Is the fact is that without the computer chips, they can't do cars. They can't build cars. So that is one of the things, to be very honest with you, that we're watching very, very closely, because that is a risk then in our multi-year forecast.
Great, thank you.
You bet, thank you. Next slide. Federal relief funds, as I briefly talked about, we were the recipient of 3 different lettings of funds. Back in May of 2020, the council received just over $226 million from the CARES Act. In December of 2020, we were very happy to receive just over $185 million of CRISA money. And then early this spring, we received another $313 million of ARP money. It's $725.8 million to be used for both council operations and regional transit operations with the regional providers. It's been awarded to the council based upon federal formulas. It needs to follow the 5307 federal guidelines with an emphasis on payroll and transit operating expenses. And all grantees, both council and subrecipients, which would be the regional providers, must follow the federal grant rules and the guidelines. Next slide. So within the 2022 budget, first of all, when we allocate the federal funds across council transit operations, we first of all make sure it's consistent with the federal goals of supporting the COVID financial challenges. We want to make sure it's very clear and transparent how we're distributing it across the modes, easy to explain, but upmost, so we're using to balance, as I said, our budgets in 2022 and thereafter. Next slide. So the transit financial outlook, one of the things I talked about earlier is that we do a lot of forecasting within transit financial operations. We basically forecast for 5 years. We look at the current year, and then we'll forecast the next 2 bienniums out the next 4 years. And we'll look at all the items, including state funding under current law, motor vehicle sales tax. As the chair mentioned, we're watching very closely what the impact on vehicle production, what that may have on our motor vehicle sales tax. We also we continually look at our structural financial position. We'll update this thing with every biennial MVS forecast and also at the end of the legislative session, but also we will also update it if we become aware of anything, potentially like motor vehicle sales tax. If that starts going south or down for us, we'll continually be re-updating our financial forecasts. Significant changes though, which could include the motor vehicle sales tax, as we talked about, fares, reserves, federal funds, service levels, as we talked about in the previous presentation. Everything though within our current financial outlook is that we feel that we've been able to push the financial cliff with the use of reserves and the federal funds out to about mid-year 2025. Next slide. So some of the ongoing risks that I kind of briefly talked about is ridership and the travel demand. As I talked about in the previous presentation, we're watching ridership very closely. We're happy how it's coming back, but we're also going to be very aware and watching very closely what happens as people come back to work and watching what the travel demand patterns may be and looking, are we going to have our morning and afternoon peaks, or are we going to have more steady service throughout the day, and basically trying to adjust our service to meet the ridership patterns, which will then ultimately have an impact on passenger fare revenue. We've talked about motor vehicle sales tax volatility. Operator hiring, as Mr. Funk talked about, is a challenge that we have, along with many other transit agencies across the United States. We've addressed the COVID impacts on operations, which were including not only the impacts on ridership, but also all the additional cleaning of vehicles, platform stations, and facilities. And as I've stressed many times, we're evaluating our budget assumptions as we move forward. Next slide. So this just gives you a quick look of our reserve levels by transit division. At the end of 2020, Metro Mobility had reserves about $39 million. Rail Ops had reserves about $20 million. You'll see reserves and bus operations of 185, contracted services of 23, and planning at 8. One of the things that will stick out to you very quickly is if you look at what the target should be in 2022, you can see Metro Mobility has a target of 9.6. Metro Bus has a target of $31 million. You can see reserves are significantly above that. What we chose to do in 2020 was we had the CARES money available. We had eligible expenses to pull the CARES money in for Metro Mobility and Metro Transit bus operations. So we chose to bring those funds in, put them into our reserves, and then use them in future years. So we will slowly be spending down those reserves, like for example, Metro Transit bus operations over the next 2 to 3 years to get us through fiscal year 25. Madam Chair, did you have a question?
Nope.
Okay, next slide. I'll turn it over to Heather.
All right, we'll give Ed a bit of a break for a couple minutes. Next slide, please. So just for the sake of time, I'm really going to whittle these slides down a bit and just maybe focus on a couple things that Ed hasn't had time to talk or didn't talk about yet. So the first is, our budget objectives generally stay pretty stable from year to year. We're here to support Thrive MSP 2040. We're supporting the Regional Transportation Policy Plan, and everything that we do as we build the budget is really looking to support the Thrive 2040. Next slide, please. So as Ed and Wes and all of our partners at Metro Transit talked about today, COVID continues to really strongly impact our budget framework. So we have a number of givens in our budget that the assumptions have been talked about. It's service levels, it's service contract rates, it's state revenue forecasts. A couple of things that I will highlight just to put in context the differences between the Metro Transit and the MTS budget is that there's 100% service levels on both the Metro Blue and Green lines, 95% service levels on both Metro Transit and MTS bus. Metro Mobility ridership and service are returning to pre-pandemic levels, and North Star will provide 4 morning and 4 evening trips with no weekend service. Next slide, please. So every year, we actively work to mitigate volatility in our budget through conservative planning of motor vehicle sales tax, maintaining our operating fund reserve targets, which Ed just walked about, and hedging fuel where we can. This year, we're also programming the federal relief funds into our 22 budget and planning for out years. Next slide, please. So overall, when you combine the Metro Transit and MTS budget, our transportation budget's about $651 million. Ed and I are going to walk you through the details on some upcoming slides. The most significant item that I'd like to call out here is what Ed was talking about before. We have just over $134 million of federal funds programmed right now in our 22 budget. And the vast majority of these are the federal COVID relief funds that we needed to be able to balance our budget. Next slide.
Okay, I will walk us now through the Metro Transit family of slides. Greg, the next slide. Okay, in Metro Transit budget assumptions, as Heather talked about, and as I've talked about, we've layered in the COVID response impact of operations. As we've talked about, we're running a bus service at 95% of pre-pandemic levels. The Metro Blue and the Green Line, we're running at 100% of service. North Star will be 4 trips morning and evening with no weekend. We're forecasting right now ridership about 42 million rides, which is running at about 55% of our pre-pandemic levels. So we're forecasting it to come back up. We're assuming continued county funding for Metro Blue, Green, North Star, and then I didn't put on here, but also then for the Orange Line. We will also continue the light rail vehicle overhaul programs. We've talked about the federal funds, the use of reserves, and Mr. Kooistra then talked about that we're increasing our investments in customer experience, security, facility upkeep, and technologies. Next slide. So this just gives you a quick snapshot of Metro Transit ridership, and really what I want to basically point out here is what the impact of the pandemic has done. You can see back in 2019, we had just under 78 million rides on Metro Transit. 2020, if you recall, we had 2 months of pre-pandemic ridership, and then the pandemic hit. We hit at 35.9 million rides. Our budget this year is at 32.3 million rides. And right now we are tracking at that and slightly above that for our budget in 2021. So I anticipate we will beat the 32 million rides. Next year, as I've talked about, we have forecasted ridership to come in at 55% of pre-pandemic levels at about 42 million rides next year. And this is one of the things, Madam Chair, as we've talked about, this is one of the risks within our budget. We will be continuing to watch ridership for the balance of this year and see how we come out of the pandemic, see how people start reacting in September and October when they start coming back to work. And we may need to adjust this ridership up or down by year end before we adopt the budget. Next slide. So I just have a trio of slides here now. This kind of gives you the pie charts for the respective lines. Metro Transit bus operations, it's in at a $381 million budget next year. You can see the different sources. We have motor vehicle sales tax, the fares, we have the fund transfer, which is coming from the excess that we collected over the 95% of motor vehicle sales tax. We're bringing that in. All other, which would be advertising revenue, but then you'll see the big piece of federal relief funds of nearly $40 million in bus operations. On the expense side, it's consistent with prior years. We're a very labor-intensive program. 77% of our budget is salary and benefits. Then you have materials, fuel, and other costs. Next slide. The next couple slides, I will just go through Metro Transit Blue and Green Line. They're very consistent with each other. Blue Line operations is just under a $46 million proposed budget next year. You'll see a little different on the slides on the revenue side. The fact is that you have the state appropriations, but then instead of having motor vehicle sales tax, then we have the county piece, which would be Hennepin County. You have fares, use of reserves, and then the federal funds coming in about $8 million. Expense side, as always, or as we stated last year, they're very consistent. About 51% of their operations is salaries and benefits. Then they have modal allocations, which is mainly police expenses, materials and supplies, utilities, propulsion, and regional allocations. Next slide. Now, Green Line operations, it's consistent with Blue Line operations, $47.9 million. The salaries or the expenses are basically the same distributions as Blue Line, but one thing you'll notice on the revenue side is you have the state money, you have the federal relief, you have the fares, but now you have 2 counties participating. You have both Hennepin County and Ramsey County contributing towards the 2022 Green Line operations. Next slide. And that finally brings me to North Star operations. It's a $16.1 million budget for next year. On the revenue side, a little different again compared to the rest of them. We have the state money, we have our fares, but then you have then the funding coming from, we split it with Anoka County, Hennepin County, Greater Minnesota, which is MnDOT, and then Sherburne County. And then you can see then we have federal funds coming in at $2.3 million. On the expense side, very heavily salaries and benefits, and then with our contract with BNSF. Next slide. Oh, yes.
Yeah, before we go back to that slide real quick.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So quick question about Anoka County. So I know we haven't received payment from them for a while. And so what happens if we don't receive, for example, payment for this budget and the monies that have been due in the past?
Very, very, thank you, Chair. Very, very good question. Right now, as you had mentioned, we have a current contract with Anoka County for calendar year 2020. We received, and they should pay us within four quarterly installments. We've received payments for quarters 1 and 2. We have not received a payment from Anoka County since July 1st of 2020. With the rest of the counties, for the rest of the lines, we have contracts in place with Hennepin and Ramsey County for Blue, Green, and North Star for calendar year 2021 operations. Anoka County has not entered into a contract with us for 2021 operations and has been basically silent on it. So one of the things that we're watching cash flows very closely on North Star operations. We feel with what we received from the other counties, we should have enough on cash flow operations to take us to sometime mid to late fourth quarter of 2021. If we do not receive anything from Hennepin County, or excuse me, from Anoka County though, we will, and if we choose to continue at this level of operation next year, we will have to come back to the council, because as you recall, we do have a fund balance policy or cash flow policy that we cannot exceed over $10 million in arrears. So, and or up to 3 months negative cash. So you could anticipate having, I will visit you along with Marie Henderson probably fourth quarter 2021 if we have not received any funding from Anoka County. And Mr. Kooistra, did you want to add anything on that?
Madam Chair, I think Ed covered most of it. I'll just say that you're pointing out what is truly a risk in our budget assumptions in terms of North Star service. If we don't get paid by a county that's responsible for, I believe, about 87% of the county share of North Star funding, then we have a problem. And we have a significant problem, and that creates decisions about whether to go into deficit spending or not. And those are difficult decisions to make when we have a funding partner not paying. I will mention that they did not, while Anoka County did not approve a new annual operating agreement for 2021, there is a master funding operating agreement that delineates the county shares and was a 5-year agreement that runs through December of 2022. So there is a base agreement there that obligates counties to a certain percentage of the operating costs. So I wish I could tell you what the solution is or what we anticipate in the future, but we don't know at this time about how this is going to run out, and that's about as honest as I could be with it.
Yep, exactly.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I proceed? Great. Next slide. So overall, with the Metro Transit operating budget, it's about a $491 million consolidated budget next year. It's up about 7%. The big pieces of the change or the increase is due to the factors that we're going up to an 85%, or excuse me, a 95% level on bus services. We're also going to full service on North Star, or excuse me, on Blue and Green Line, and a little more service on the North Star, which is basically adjusting all of our costs and taking our costs up, which would be salaries and benefits, supplies. And there's also an increase you'll see in regional allocations of about $8.3 million. That's mainly related to technology. So it's about a $491 million budget next year. Next slide. Then the final thing that I also then add in is we take the $491 million budget, then we add in capital expense. It's called capital expense reimbursement. Those are recognizing the salaries for folks that are actually working on capital projects. Then we're bringing in the capital funds to pay for that. That would be, for example, like Jim Alexander and his staff. We're recognizing their costs here so we can get a whole cloth of what our operating costs would be for full salaries and benefits for our systems. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm done with the Metro Transit portion. I will turn it back over to Heather.
All right, next slide, please. So one of the pieces that I just want to call out, you're going to see some differences in how the pie charts play out between Metropolitan Transportation Services and Metro Transit. In all of Metro Transits, you saw that the pie charts were heavy in the salaries and benefits. In the MTS ones, you're going to see, just because of our service model, you're going to see the largest pieces of the pie charts in service provider costs. So some of the big stories in the MTS budget this year are ones you have heard already. Metro Mobility ridership is coming back at it's not coming back really fast, but it is coming back very slow, very steady. But right now we're at 70% of pre-pandemic ridership levels, and we're anticipating that we'll be back to full pre-pandemic ridership levels in the 22 budget. So what that means is we've basically budgeted our 22 ridership equal to our 2020 budget. Gasoline is at $3 a gallon. We do not hedge our fuel just because of our service model. And about every 5 years, we may be switching garages. So it just does not work for us to hedge the fuel. Fuel is a really big deal for us. Kind of rule of thumb, for about every quarter-cent tax goes up or down, we're going to have to add, or we get to subtract, about $1 million of costs. So when we built our budget, the fuel futures were at about $3. Since then, they've been updated to about $3.30 a gallon. So we're going to be watching this really closely. Our bus service levels are the exact same as Metro Transit. We have those aligned across the entire transportation division. And we anticipate our bus ridership is going to be at 55% of pre-pandemic levels. And similar to Metro Transit, we have a significant use of one-time federal funds in our budget. Next slide, please. So our contracted services ridership, you can see what happened with COVID in about 2020. The big story here is the blue lines at the bottom is Metro Transit, or excuse me, is Metro Mobility. We took a big hit like pretty much everybody in transit did in 2020 with COVID, but we're really steadily seeing an increase in the ridership. Just the other change you're going to notice here is that those red bars, which was the Metro Red Line, you're going to stop seeing those in the MTS budget because that has transitioned over to Metro Transit. Next slide, please. So our for the whole budget consolidated for MTS is just shy of $135 million. The vast majority of that, about 70% of our budget, is spent on Metro Mobility. The rest is for our regular route contracted bus service and Transit Link. And we're funded by a combination of state general fund, MVEST, passenger fares, and then our federal funding. Next slide, please. So kind of our highlights before, we did program a fair amount of federal funds into Metro Mobility. Our ridership is back. We've got that gasoline that we're watching really closely. We have had some really good news in Metro Mobility the last couple sessions. You know, first we were our own individual line, and now we're transitioning into a state forecasted program in state fiscal year 26. This is huge news for us. This provides support on the operating budget and the capital budget as well. We're in some early planning, so this is a topic that we'll be back before you once we have some more details worked out. Next slide, please. So this is what our budget looks like in Metro Mobility. It's just a little bit over $96 million. Again, something like north of 90% of our budget is spent either on service contracts and or the fuel to drive those buses. So when COVID hit and our ridership reduced, you saw the Metro Mobility budget go down. You're going to see a proportional increase as the ridership goes up. The state pays for about 60% of our budget this year, with the federal COVID relief filling in about $31 million, and the rest is supported by passenger fares. Next slide, please. So the next part of our budget is we combine contracted regular route, transit link, and van pool. It's coming in at about $28 million. Very similar story here on the expense side. You're going to see the transit provider expense and fuel, is the very vast majority of our budget. And then we do pay for a handful of staff and our regional allocation that we need to support our budget. And that's procurement, that's IT, that's human resources staff. And we're paid it's funded about equally between motor vehicle sales tax and federal. The vast majority of that federal money is COVID relief funds, and it's rounded out by passenger fares and some really modest use of reserves. Next slide, please. So our transportation planning and administration bucket, it's our MPO. So it's the work that we do as the regional MPO, and there's also some additional administration functions in there. We do a lot of subrecipient grant monitoring, so there are some staff that is non-MPO related in this budget. So it's a really heavy staff-driven budget with about 35% of our budget paying for salaries and benefits. Our planning staff use a lot of consultants to do a lot of the work that they do in the region. We also pay, again, for the regional allocation. And then the vast majority of this budget is federal, but it's not federal COVID relief funds. These are funds that we get from the federal government and pass through MnDOT to do a lot of our consulting studies, and they also pay for staff. And then motor vehicle sales tax is the local match for our federal grants, and it also helps round out our budget. Next slide, please. So MTS houses the pass-through program for the regional suburban transit providers. So we pass through a couple major buckets of money. The first is motor vehicle sales tax. There is a regional policy, a regional formula that is used to allocate those funds. And all of the federal money that the suburban transit providers get goes through our pass-through program right now. So in the second quarter budget amendment, I think you're going to see about $10 million of funds being passed through to the suburban transit providers, and any other federal operating grants you'll see hit this program too. I anticipate this may be an area our budget changes between now and final adoption, mainly because we know the November forecast is coming with MBEST, and all of our budget lines will, revenue lines will adjust because of that. Next slide, please. So here's our consolidated budget, similar to what Ed presented in Metro Transit. There's just a couple things I want to call out on this slide. Take a look at that. Under the expenses, our fuels and materials line, that's up 24%. Last year, our fuel was budgeted at $2.50, and this year it's budgeted at $3 a gallon. So this just kind of shows what a big impact fuel prices make in our budget. It's an area of risk that we're watching really, really closely. Next slide, please. And with that, that wraps up the MTS portion of the budget. So I'm sure Ed and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ed and Heather. A lot of information. So any questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
I just want to express my appreciation for the level of detail and the forethought that you've had about things that we want to be able to track closely, and your intent to report to the Metropolitan Council members on the status of some key issues that were raised. And, you know, it makes me feel more comfortable as we deal with some of these unexpected changes and some difficult decisions that might have to be made into the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any additional questions or comments from council members? All right, well, there's a ton of information that we covered just in the information item section between the moving forward to stronger, better transit system and the budget. I'm sure as you have time, if you are sitting back and have are processing this after the meeting, you can reach out to any of the staff from Metro Transit or to Ed or Heather on the budget, because we did go through a ton of information tonight. So if there are no other questions or comments, I'm looking real quick. All right, thank you all, and we can be adjourned for the evening. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.